I was commissioned to record some clocks for a sound effects record for the very early days of Quadraphonic.
And when we were doing Time, he suggested we might like to have these clocks. My memory of it is just this room full of tapes rolling around, because without any sort of computer help, everything had to be done manually.
Let us take you back to the first time you ever experienced the dark side of the moon. Finding the prism, digging through the record store, straying sounds from your father's stereo, or that friend that gave you the album and told you, listen to this. Sit back, relax, open your mind, fall in love again with the dark side of the moon. And feel free to sync it up with the Wizard of Oz, too, if you're so inclined. The 50th anniversary of Dark Side of the Moon on the GOAT.
We're reaching the halfway point of our retrospective 50 years of Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. And now we're starting to get into the main suite of the record, so to speak. Some of the most famous songs in Pink Floyd's discography. We've got Us and Them. Money is coming up as well, too, which keep your ears perked up on that one, because you're going to hear a story of how that song was recorded, as told by none other than David Gilmour himself. But I want to get into one track that's about to play here, and that is The Great Gig in the Sky, one of my favorite tracks on this record, because it is an absolute showcase of how Pink Floyd would play with sonic sound. First off, with Alan Parsons in the booth recording this record, all of these electronic freakouts and sounds were created by some of the greatest and most advanced studio technology that existed at the time. And you can hear it permeate through this record with things that seem like child's play nowadays, a 16-track mixer, a Moog synthesizer, sounds that were created that hold up the test of time 50 years down the line. But rather than geek out on all the technology here, which we totally could do, I want to point out two things that make The Great Gig in the Sky so cool. First off, The Great Gig in the Sky features the vocals of Claire Torrey, and it's the only time that Pink Floyd has ever used a woman on backing vocals. And according to an interview conducted with David Gilmour, he said that they weren't even considering Claire Torrey at the time. She was just in the same studios they were, EMI Studios. Pink Floyd couldn't find their preferred background vocalists. Alan Parsons is the one that invites her into the studio, and Pink Floyd doesn't know what to make of this woman. She's this little housewife-looking lady, but once they lay down the track and she belts out those soaring vocals, they knew they were onto something right. But funny enough about this one, Claire Torrey, after laying that track down, that iconic screaming vocal, she was embarrassed by it. She came out and she apologized to the band, and they were like, no, that's awesome. So pretty much right place, right time on that one, and you have one of the most iconic vocal lays of all time. There's one other thing I want to point out here, though, that I've always really loved about Pink Floyd records, and it's vocal drop. So you'll notice throughout Pink Floyd's discography, there are tons of vocal drops, which are all done fairly practically. One of my favorites being on Young Lust off the Wall album, when Pink Floyd called a telephone operator overseas and made her believe that she was in the midst of a husband trying to get on a hold of an unfaithful wife. That's why you hear things like,
I wonder why you hung up. Is there supposed to be someone else there besides your brother to answer? Hello? This is the United States calling. Are we reaching? He keeps hanging up. What's the man answering?
But this concept is actually way more explored on Dark Side of the Moon to really awesome effect. And here's how it happened. Roger Waters, during recording, decides that there needs to be some sort of interlay between tracks and something to carry the themes of madness, violence, death, fear, greed. So what he does is he runs around the studios and just recruits a bunch of people. And he puts each one of them individually in a darkly lit studio with a bunch of flashcards on a table. And they all contain questions. Now, some of them are fairly gentle, even mundane. What's your favorite food? What's your favorite color? But then the questions start to elevate as the people get more comfortable and able to give more close to the heart answers. So then the questions start going into things like, when's the last time you were violent? Were you in the right to be violent? And surprisingly, people gave honest and genuine answers. One guy, a guy by the name of Roger the Hat Manifold, told them about a violent encounter that he'd had with another driver and that he had given him a
quick, short, sharp shock. They don't do it again. Dig it? I mean, he got off light because I could have given him a thrashing. I only hit him once. It's only a difference of right and wrong, innit? I mean, good manners don't cost nothing, do they?
The band's road manager's wife, Patricia Watts, was the one that talks about,
Yeah, it's definitely in the right. That geezer is cruising for a bruising.
but at the very end of each interview, Waters asked them one question: how do you feel about death? And shockingly, the answers are very candid. Manifold once again saying, live for today, gone for tomorrow, that's me. In fact, one of the most iconic lines in these vocal drops,
Why should I be frightened of dying? See no reason for it, you gotta go sometime.
came from an Irish doorman named Jerry O'Driscoll, who just got roped into the studio sessions last second. And just the way he says it sticks in your brain. There's an authenticity to it, a casualness. Fun fact though, O'Driscoll would actually go on to say,
There is no dark side in the moon, really. Matter of fact, it's all dark. The only thing that makes it look light is the sun.
guy's just a doorman and he's dropping facts like this. Okay, there's one more story I want to tell about this before we get back to the record. I find this one actually quite amusing, so I wanted to mention this one. There were two people, some rock and roll artists, that were actually removed from the session. Their lines actually weren't used because the band felt that these two artists were trying too hard to be funny and be flippant and be silly about it. Those two were Paul and Linda McCartney. Yeah, couldn't take it too seriously, so they were booted from Dark Side of the Moon. However, when you hear that man say,
I was really drunk at the time.
that is actually a member of Wings, Henry McCullough. So technically, you got a Wings Pink Floyd collaboration, as brief as it is. Why don't you listen for it in these next few tracks here, as we look back on 50 years of the greatest record of all time, Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon.